Another day, another about-face from the failed Fourth Estate, also known as America's media industrial complex. Remember last June when former President Trump held a Bible outside a church up for everyone to see? That was Lafayette Park right outside the White House. There were days of breathless media reports about the former president and Attorney General Bill Barr having cops remove protesters with excessive force. Of course, that wasn't necessarily true. The crowd control was not done for the purposes of a photo op. We know this from a new report from the Inspector General's office. Quote, the evidence we reviewed showed the park was cleared to allow a contractor to safely install anti-scale fencing in response to destruction of federal property and an injury to officers that occurred on May 30th and May 31st. This was another one of those protests the media told us was a peaceful one, but obviously not here, according to the Inspector General's report. The evidence established that officials made those decisions hours before they knew of a potential presidential visit to that park, which occurred later that day.
The narrative we thought we knew is not the reality.
That was Ken Danlian on Meet the Press Daily saying the narrative we thought we knew was not reality. And how many times have we heard that lately? Let's welcome in now host of the Rubin Report, Dave Rubin, author of the book, Don't Burn This Book, Thinking for Yourself in an Age of Unreason. And we promote the book, Dave, because it's critically important now because you've got just a mountain of media mouthpieces saying the same thing. President Trump clearing Lafayette Park using stun grenades because these protesters were peaceful and he was mad. He wanted his photo op. And then any catharsis again from you to hear a guy like Ken Danlian say the narrative we thought was true turns out was false, Dave? Anything there or just anger?
Well, John, as you know, I don't want people to burn the book, but I wouldn't mind them maybe throwing the book at one of these people because enough of this nonsense. You know me, John, I don't like to be hyperbolic or over the top, but these people, and when I say these people, I mean the mainstream journalists, right, the corporate press, they lie about literally everything. There is almost no major story in America in the last, say, 3 or 4 years, or really since Trump, and perhaps even further back than that they have not lied if it fit their narrative, or they ignore, right? So if you just think about Brett Kavanaugh's a rapist, and the Covington kids are racist, and very fine people on both sides, and the Russia hoax, and now we don't talk about Hunter Biden and the Nword because it doesn't fit the narrative. They make up narrative stories. We could use these people in Hollywood, although, you know, Hollywood's pretty awful too, so we could probably just redo the whole thing. But yeah, if something fits the narrative, they run with it, and then they sort of half apologize months later. Another one would be, remember just a few months back, we covered it together, when Trump was on the phone with the Secretary of State of Georgia about the election, and everybody claimed, oh, Trump pressured him into finding votes. And then, of course, months later, Washington Post issues a retraction. No, that's not what they did. But nobody sees the retractions, and then we just rinse and repeat over and over.
I was going to say this is, truth is stranger than fiction, but it's not truth. I mean, and to your point, these sound like screenplays almost, the way they're comprised, the narrative here. But, I guess a better way to say it is it's art imitating life. And I use art in quotation marks because, whatever. It's a simple question, too. Sometimes I watch this stuff and I wish I hadn't watched it. I feel kind of like I need a shower after sometimes. But who do you think is worse, Brian Stelter or Chuck Todd when it comes to this bootlicking style of interviews?
Oh, this is tough. This is tough, Bachman, and I've only had one cup of coffee.
And
today,
I ask the tough questions, Dave, always.
I will try to think this thing through. No, I would say Stelter is probably the worst, sort of in mainstream corporate media, because he hosts a show called Reliable Sources, and it is the most ironically named show in the history of television. This man is a Democrat operative propagandist on a Democrat operative propagandist network that is CNN. He pretends he's policing the media, which, by the way, is a very worthy thing to do. Howard Kurtz used to host that show on CNN years ago, and I remember as a kid I used to watch it on Sunday mornings. I enjoyed it. I like watching the media criticize itself. It's an important piece of our narrative as a country that we can criticize the media, of course. And by the way, none of us are above criticism, John, and I have no doubt that Media Matters is watching this right now, preparing a hit piece on both of us. But Stelter, because of the ironically named show, where basically he spends an hour each week trying to figure out what Tucker Carlson had for lunch, he's just the worst. I mean, Chuck Todd, we get it. You're a Democrat, too. We all know you're a Democrat, but that's what we expect out of NBC News. Stelter takes it to another level.
And, you know, for guys who wear beards, Chuck Todd's not doing you any favors. You know, you make it work. He doesn't. I'm just saying. It's just a fact. I can say it.
Thank you.
I can say it. All right. You mentioned Hunter Biden. Where's the Hunter Biden coverage? You know, we can look past on some stories that the New York Times felt that they really needed to delve into, like a 15-year-old girl at the time who lost her ability to attend the University of Tennessee for using a racial slur on social media when she was 15. 3 years later, somehow someone writes a story about her and she doesn't get to go to the University of Tennessee anymore. No repercussions here for Hunter Biden. You know, maybe the New York Times covered it, but not like they covered this other story. Didn't cost Hunter Biden anything.
John, this story, you know, it takes a lot truly to sort of just really get me agitated. But this one is really something else because New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, the usual suspects have all ignored this. Now, look, I honestly don't really care whether he said a bad word in a text years ago, and I don't like policing language and all that. But we know for a fact, John, if you or I, or say the former president's son, Donald Trump Jr., was caught saying the N-word in a text, it would be leading the story. They'd be trying to figure out an impeachment over it. And the fact that they ignore it, you know, one of the types of fake news, people think that fake news is only, oh, the headline doesn't match the story or it's a complete fabrication. The most nefarious, the most dangerous type of fake news actually is the stories that they won't cover because it doesn't fit the narrative. By here, this is the same guy who I think was, what was he, snorting crack out of a carpet or something?
I thought it was Parmesan cheese.
It was unclear.
Okay. He was trying to find crack, but he did the Parmesan cheese on accident. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to keep it all straight.
That's why I always grate my own. You don't get that process stuff. But the point is, John, I mean, look, they ignore things if they think it's going to hurt the Democrats. And then it makes everyone else crazy because, you know, I don't know if they know this over at CNN, but there's something called the internet. And on this place called the internet, people can see video clips, people can see pictures of things, people can see the truth.
Well, no, Dave, I think they started to figure this out because you go back and look for things that took place in, you know, history to you know, when I'm researching segments, it's hard to find stuff like,
absolutely.
You know, the video of the tank man in Tiananmen Square. That stuff is you know, straight from the internet magically. But, you know, I think it's a very important point you make. These lies by omission are sometimes the most costly. We were talking about this hydroxychloroquine and zinc and erythromycin study that would have prevented people from going to the hospital. That was suppressed. You know, the Wuhan lab leak theory. Lives were lost as a result of these stories being suppressed. And, you know, kudos to Breitbart, too, because they did a kind of breakdown of 12 people who were canceled for using the N-word like Hunter Biden. We can talk about some of those names. Country singer Morgan Wallen, NASCAR driver Kyle Larson, Michael Richard Kramer a long time ago was canceled for doing this in a comedy routine. I mean, you remember when it was Richard Pryor and Chevy Chase did that very kind of you know, thing on Saturday Night Live, and that was like a you know, watershed moment for this country in race relations. And now here we are all these years later, and some people can use the N-word, some people can't, and that's not necessarily determined by your race.
No, look, you may remember, I don't know if he was on the Breitbart list, but you may remember Kyle Kashuv, who was one of the survivors of the Parkland shooting, and he came out as a Second Amendment advocate while the rest of the kids came out basically as anti-gun activists. Kyle was treated horribly by the media. He still graduated #1 in his class, was admitted to Harvard, and then some of the activists didn't like Kyle because of his gun rights activism. So they leaked a Google document from when he was in 9th or 10th grade when he said some bad words. Harvard then rejected him. Harvard, by the way, they also reject Asian people because they don't want too many Asian people there. So Harvard is systemically racist. But the point is, if that is a national story, which it was, that this Parkland kid, who's a great kid, by the way, and I hired him, for the record, when he didn't get into Harvard, I actually gave him a job, and he's a spectacular kid who's got a great future in front of him. But the point is, that makes news when a kid in 9th grade, you know, says some language. But when the president's son, because he's a Democrat, we pretend we don't see it.
Yeah, and you know, Breitbart also did a breakdown of kind of the scoreboard here when it comes to the N-word usage. The Bidens have 15, the Trumps 0. So for whatever that's worth, they went back and looked at President Biden's record when he was in the U.S. Senate. He used the N-word, you know, kind of just slid right off his tongue. It was in testimony. He was quoting somebody else. You can find the video online. But again, these words are learned.
John, off the top of my head, I'm scribbling it down right now, but how many Democrats can we come up with that have been in blackface? Jimmy Kimmel, who's a comedian, Ralph Northam.
What about Terry
the
McAuliffe defeating, Democrat Terry McAuliffe defeating all the minority candidates in the Virginia gubernatorial race to succeed the guy who wore blackface, as you indicated there? Anyway.
We are beyond the pale, my friend.
We are. And, sometimes it's liberating to be out here beyond the pale because it's just so ridiculous sometimes. Something else, too, that got a lot of press attention, this poll seems ridiculous to me, but there's a survey out there that claims, actually, we have another poll. This one, I think, is actually accurate, that progressives are more likely than conservatives to ditch their friends over politics. And, this is kind of typical with liberals. Like, Dave, I get a lot of... you meet a liberal, you say, hey, I'm John, and they're like, I hate you. And you haven't even had a chance to introduce yourself yet. But they are always the less tolerant ones, aren't they?
Well, they absolutely are, because their whole worldview, the lefty worldview, is wrapped up in politics. It doesn't have sort of any verifiable, truly honest truth to it, meaning a truth outside of themselves. So generally speaking, lefties wake up and whatever they feel about the given day, whatever they feel about whatever's happening in the news, and especially whatever they feel is sort of the reverse of what the Trump thing might feel like, is how they define themselves. And what I've found, as you know, I was a lefty and I've obviously moved over to the right, let's say, but what I've found is that people on the right, conservatives, libertarians, whatever you want to call it, basically, because they believe in a truth outside of themselves, and we can call that God, and that's sort of a whole other conversation, but they believe that the government is not everything.
Right.
They believe in family. They believe in cohesion between the generations. They're not that upset. So I can talk to all sorts of people on the right, and basically everybody agrees to disagree. But I hate to tell you what they're going to say about me for doing a show with this scary John Bachman guy on the scary, scary Newsmax.
I am a scary guy sometimes.
You are scary.
Only
with that
sometimes.
Newsman hair. You're a scary guy.
I need a haircut, though, Dave. Anyway, that's what my director, Tony, told me. So we got to run. Great to see you as always. We'll talk soon.
Good seeing you, John.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.